So thank you. Thanks, Josh, and hello, everyone. So for those of you who have been on sits with me midday before, you may know that, or you may remember that I've been doing a lot of work with the texts from the Shem MiShmuel. So these are texts written by Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein, who was the second Sochachover Rebbe. That's a offshoot of the Kotzker Hasidim, and he was in the early 20th century. And I've been looking at his texts that specifically mention dance, or in this case, I was actually looking a little bit in a different direction. But I thought, interestingly enough, he still ends up talking about embodiment. So he seems to be a fantastic person for this material. Adi, if you wouldn't mind sharing the text. Here we go. And can you make it just a little bit bigger for us? We might have to scroll down. So this is actually a commentary on this week's parasha. I don't always bring a commentary that matches with the week's parasha, but this one happens to. And in it, he says that according to Midrash Tanchuma, Avram eulogized Sarah with the entire portion of Eshet Chayil. So you may be familiar with Eshet Chayil from Proverbs, and in which it says she accomplishes with the desires of her hands. Whereas normally, he says, we would normally associate desire as a function of the heart. And from the above, he says, it should be understood that above all, it is the holiness of the body that was from its essence drawn to Hashem. So it's as if it's not just a function of the mind, but actually there's something in the body that is drawn to serve Hashem. As if the hands had a will and desire of in their very bones. And this is interesting because he uses a word that could be translated either as essence or as bones. And you can see in one place I've translated it as essence and in another place as bones. Then he says, likewise, the Midrash quotes David saying, I considered my ways and I turned my feet to your testimonies. Each and every day. So this is again. So that the beginning of that, by the way, is from Psalms. But then the Midrash continues. Each and every day, I would consider and say, I'm going to go to place X in the home of a certain person. But as I'm walking, my feet would bring me to the synagogues and to the houses of study. So it's like. David has an intention. He's thinking he's just going to go hang out with his friends. And he keeps being drawn as if his feet are taking him with their own intention to the Beit Midrash. So Shmuel Bernstein says it's as if the feet have a mind of their own. Moreover, it's also said that the tongue has its own wisdom. And then he quotes from Psalms, with the wisdom of his mouth, he guided them. And just like that, it was with the hands, with Sarah's hands. So I thought this was really interesting, this idea that the body has its own intentionality, that it has its own messages, that it has its own essential desire to serve Hashem, its own essential holiness. And Adi, if you want, you can drop that text now. And I thought that was especially interesting. I've been reading, I don't know if anybody else has been reading this book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk. And he's talking about the way that the body, in his case, he's talking about the way that the body internalizes trauma, but then he also talks about the way that working with the body can become the way to address trauma, right? So today I wanted to do some work just paying attention to the body, because I think so often, especially nowadays when we are so tied up with screens and with texts, we can forget about the body and we forget to listen to the body. And many of us haven't had really the training to learn how to listen to our body. And it takes a sensitivity. So for today's sit, I would like you to find a comfortable position. And you may want actually to lie down if you're someplace where you have space to lie down and you aren't worried about falling asleep, then you may want to lie down. If you're seated, then try to bring yourself to a position that is at ease but also alert, with the feet planted on the ground. And just begin by taking a few steady breaths. Just allowing that breath to drop into the body. And once you've had a chance to anchor your attention through the breath into your body, turn that attention to your feet and to the bottom of your feet, the soles of your feet against whatever surface they're planted on. Noticing the sensation on your skin. Perhaps the pressing of a seam from your sock with an edge of a shoe. Just noticing what is there. And you may notice that in addition to exterior sensation, there's interior sensation. Muscles, bones. Perhaps some amount of tension or discomfort. Just allowing whatever is there to be as it is. Just noticing it as it is. Now, drawing your attention upward to your ankles and your calves. Again, you needn't change anything that's there. You needn't resist any sensation or try to fix any feeling. Just allow yourself to explore it with gentleness. This is how my body is today. Now drawing your attention to your knees and your thighs. The weight of your body in your seat. Noticing all that is there without judgment. But with curiosity. This is what it feels like when I'm sitting in a seat or lying down. This is the sensation on the exterior of my body and the interior. Drawing your attention to your hips. And you may notice that there is perhaps in some part of your body discomfort or tension, perhaps a desire to move, to shift. Allow that to be there in your attention, in your awareness, and just explore it as it is. This is what is here today in my body. Now turning the attention to your back, lower back, and stomach, your organs and intestines. Perhaps there's some sensations that surprise you. You were expecting to feel something different, but this is what is here. Now turning the attention to the upper back, the shoulders, the sternum, your chest, your heart and lungs, and any sensation that is there. Noticing the spine and shoulder blades. You may find that there's some part of your body that wants extra attention. That's okay. Just give it whatever attention and awareness it needs. Exploring whatever is there. When you are ready, you can shift your awareness to your arms and your hands, your elbows. Opening yourself with great patience to inquire to each exquisite sensation. Noticing prominent sensations and subtle sensations. Now drawing your attention to your head, your neck, the surface of your face, the inside of your mouth, your earlobes, your eyelids. Exploring whatever may be there. There's no right or wrong. for how this feels. It just is what it is right now. Now, for these last few moments, I invite you to hold your entire body in your awareness. Just noticing whatever part of your body lights up with the movement of your breath. Noticing pleasant sensations, perhaps uncomfortable sensations, even neutral sensations. Just whatever is there. And when it is time to finish, I'll ring a bell.
All right. Thank you so much, Heather. It's a beautiful sit. We're going to conclude in a moment. First, we're going to give those who are, and on the other side of Kaddish, you have the opportunity to stay with us and share reflections. I also want to give a plug before, if those are signing off, that next week, just that we're doing a 5-day intensive with Rabbi Sam Feinsmith as well, and during this time. So you have that to look forward to. Please share that with others as well and invite them to come. We're going to now give those who are mourning a chance to say Kaddish for those who are, for anyone that they are reciting Kaddish for. If you want to share the name of the person that you're reciting Kaddish with in the chat, please feel welcome to do so. And you can unmute for this portion, and then we'll come back on the other side and continue for a few minutes. So please, if you're saying Kaddish, please feel welcome to join me. Yitkadal,
Vikata Shamirabha
Amen. Remind the Lord today, Samachite, Kaiko, Meko, Kayate, Kobe, Tisao, Kadala, Amen. Ishme Rabba,
Ishara, Ishkaba, Ishara,
Ade,
Kadar Vitale,
Bella mi colmi kata bishikata, Kushkata bimikata, Brahmana Vishnu Amen. Shmela Rabba Mishmaya Vikali, Ayinale Mugakasa Vimahana, Shalom Vimahana, Master Shalom, Amen. Yahweh Israel,
Amen.
Thank you. So if you are staying around, please feel welcome to stick around for a few minutes while we have a conversation with Heather, and please feel welcome to share your reflections on the experience or any questions that came up. Please feel encouraged to put those in the chat. If you're leaving us, want to wish you a Tzedchem Shalom and invite you back tomorrow or any other day at 12:30 Eastern for our next set. So Heather, thank you as always for such skillful leadership of the set. And it looks like we are having some technical difficulties. We're going to take this up with Zoom. If you have any questions, you can message them directly to me or to Adi, to IJS, and we'll get them and we'll be able to address them. Heather, the text you shared was so was provocative in the sense, as you alluded to, the sense of the body keeps the score. I know my colleague Rabbi Erin Leib Smokler in her text study, I forget for this week or last week, mentioned exactly that book, and I wonder if you just elaborate, give you an invitation. What are you finding as you're reading that book? Because I know a lot of people are, a little bit more of what you're finding, how it may be informing your own practice or things that it's, the illumination it's bringing you. I think you're still, and I think you're still.
Sorry. So full disclosure is that I'm not all the way through the book. A lot of it is not a surprise to me. But I was really attracted to it, first of all, because I heard the author being interviewed. And he was talking about research that he had done, not only on trauma and the way that the body internalizes trauma and holds on to trauma even when our brain wants to suppress the memory of the trauma. But he also talked about the kinds of things they found to be helpful in addressing trauma. And that was especially moving to me because he talked about some of the conventional therapeutic forms that we're used to, talk therapy or various kinds of medications. But then he also said that just as effective are things like communal meals, communal dancing, and communal singing. And anybody who knows me knows that as soon as you say communal dancing and singing, that already, that's lighting me up. So that was part of the reason I was really drawn to it. And he talks about the way that allows us to come back into a sense of being whole and connected and fully part of a community. Obviously, right now, I think it's especially difficult because those are exactly the things that we're being told that we still can't do yet in many cases. Communal eating we can at least do. But it's not a surprise to me also because it resonates very much with my own experience that frequently my body has something to tell me that maybe my brain isn't quite fully processed yet. And I think all of us have had that experience at some level, right? I've also found that it can be really useful sometimes when I have a question that my brain finds completely confounding. So, in other words, you know how they always say, like, when you have to make a decision and you can't make a decision, sit down and write down the pros and the cons. And I don't know about anybody else. I've never found that that really helps me very much because I end up with two lists and I still don't know really what I want to do, right? On the other hand, I have found that it can be very informative to sit, to bring myself into sort of my meditative, calm space, and to draw up my options and just to see how my body reacts to thinking about those options. So, oftentimes, um, thinking about a choice will trigger a physical response in my body. And that response can inform me better than intellectualizing the choice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also fascinating to me that it comes up in the context of Abraham, right after the death of Sarah, and and after the Akedah, and just all we don't the language, introducing the language of how this how that opens up the various traumas that family suffered that we read through but aren't necessarily processed, right? Aren't necessarily addressed, but clearly there is I mean, as my colleague and my own rabbi Ari Hart over Shabbos this past week, like said, this is not a children's book. Right? I mean, these are not stories you actually want to teach children. There's a ton of just really difficult stuff. There's a violent, emotionally and physically violent story or set of stories, and so it's fascinating that it opens it up. There's a question here, from Laura. How do you distinguish between the body's messages and intentionality and those of the soul? The body's messages and intentionality and the messages and intentionality of the soul. Would you share suggestions as to how to begin to better listen to the bodies, or do you make that distinction? Right? Do you that's a really interesting question.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that we necessarily. I think that we're much more unified than we think. I mean, I think sometimes it's helpful for us to talk about brain, body, soul. But let's face it. If you take your brain out of your body is not going to be anymore, and vice versa, right? So I think they can be helpful as metaphors, but ultimately we're a unified being, right? Um, and I do find, yeah, I think that um, the distinction between body and soul. I don't know that for me that there's a real clear distinction between body and soul.
There may be, I guess in my experience, there may be times when I can get clear that my body, in desire or in pain or in, something that it may be experiencing, that when I can tap into it and be mindful about it, I can then open up the space to think, to more mindfully respond to it, right? And not be necessarily just governed by, either a reptilian response, a fear response, or a desire response, or something like that. But I want to be aware of what my body is saying. I just don't necessarily want to be governed by it.
Yeah.
If that speaks to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, there's something, there's this concept that, our teachers talk about a lot of the awareness that is aware of our awareness, right? So that piece that is aware of us thinking, that observes our own thoughts, right? So perhaps we can see that as the soul, that thing that is able to say, oh, right now I'm feeling this. Right now I'm feeling discomfort. I'm feeling pain, right? That is able to sort of watch that stream of experience flow by, right?
Mhm.
Boy, people ask really interesting and difficult questions.
Well, it's also being able to name it, right? It's
Right.
that in being able to name it and say, the recognize piece of like the rain practice, for instance, right? That to bring awareness to that is already such a first step, because in so many cases we're not even aware that that's there, right? We haven't calmed ourselves down to get that, to open up that space to be aware of what our bodies may be telling us. This, I mean, it leads into another question that I got here that was sent to me from Judith. I'm with you on the list never working. But when you listen to or feel the body to still yourself and to find an answer, how do you know if the feeling you become aware of is due to, for example, fear, because you're right to be afraid and therefore say no? Or is it fear you have to confront and say yes, right? And yeah, so I'll give you that question.
I think the first thing is just being aware that you have the fear, right? So many times we're not even aware that we have the fear, right? We just know that we have the impulse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think once we are aware that we have the fear, then we can do something with that, and it can be up to us what we decide is the best thing to do with that. Sometimes fear is really justified,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes there's fear that we need to address that we're suppressing, right? Because we think we're not supposed to be afraid, or we're not supposed to feel these feelings, right? Um, so just because something's fear doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad reason to react. Sometimes fear is quite justified.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the main thing is, first of all, the awareness that it's there, because so often we have the impulse to act or to say, and we're not even aware of where it's coming from, right?
Mm-hmm. Here's it's another version of this question, and deciding, do you follow your heart or your head? There was one response that I got that said maybe is usually no, because we know wholeheartedly when the answer is yes, which that resonates in a lot of ways. My kids pick up on that, right? Like, Ava, can we do blah, blah, blah? Well, maybe. And they know that I'm really just actually deferring. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes. But when I say yes, they know it, right? And that could be a similar thing to, yes, you can feel a yes, right? That you can feel. And then there are other times when you say yes and you don't really know. Like you do that with eyes open, or, I'm being cautious, or,
And some of us have been sort of raised to say yes all the time,
mm-hmm.
right?
And that could be a fear of conflict also, right? That could be that what's the real fear that's operating is I don't want to have to say no, so I avoid it, or I just, defer it.
Right. Or I don't feel like I have permission to say no.
Yeah.
There was someone who said something about head versus heart, and I just want to say it's really interesting that the word that is the modern Hebrew word for heart in biblical understanding is also the word for the brain, right? So again, we think of these things as sort of existing in dichotomy, but that understanding, it's not necessarily it hasn't existed forever, that understanding of head and heart as being two different things, right?
And oftentimes we'll translate that even as heart mind, right? Just as one word, right?
Right,
You find
exactly.
a lot of mindfulness literature. Sure.
Yeah.
So many good questions and comments. I just wanted to acknowledge. I got a message from John just about talking about dealing with the intense trauma of having lost his spouse in August and missing sharing meals and Shabbat. So much that you referred to. And so John just wanted to say that we see you and acknowledge you and hold you, and hope this community can be a source of comfort and some sense of presence as you're making your way through that morning journey. So we're with you in that. Okay, and the last question that we're going to have to wrap up in terms of the time, but just Gail asks, is that word live, which I think is what you were referring to, the
Yes,
word
the
live,
word
which
is love. Yes.
literally in modern Hebrew would be translated as heart, but in more ancient Hebrew would encompass sort of heart mind, might be how we think about it. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Heather, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful. Oh, and here and the book is The Body Keeps the Score, which is not by that's a different author. There's also a book, I guess you're mentioning, when the Body Says No. So that's another one. But this one is The Body Keeps the Score, and by Bessel van der, the last part of his last name, Bessel van der Kolk, right?
Yeah, and Josh, I do want to say something. I think that John tapped on something that I think is important, and I think also comes up in this book, that sometimes, pushing ourselves to address something is really can be counterproductive. But what he brings up that I think is so beautiful is that sometimes we can address our needs by addressing our body's needs, right? And I think John was alluding to that too.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Heather. Always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will be back here tomorrow, same time. Hope you can be with us then or whenever.